I'm going to tell you about a king who ruled the night but feared one small, warm sound more than any enemy. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it too, the heartbeat that changed everything. The winter air around Castle Noctavir tasted like iron and pine, sharp enough to wake a man from a century-long dream. Inside, the halls were warmer than they should have been, lit by honey-colored lamps that softened the stone and made the shadows look almost gentle. Almost. The servants walked quietly, never meeting the mirrors, never speaking above a breath. They had learned the language of a vampire court: silence, patience, and secrets tucked behind bowed heads. King Lucien Valebryn moved through it all like a storm that had taught itself restraint. He wore no crown tonight. He rarely did. His authority wasn't made of gold. It lived in the way doors opened before his hand reached them, in the way even the torches seemed to lean away when he passed. His eyes, dark, watchful, old, missed nothing, yet they carried an exhaustion no one dared to name. Because the truth was, Lucien was tired of winning. He had fought for power once long ago, when power felt like proof that his existence mattered. He had gathered loyal houses under his banner, ended feuds that had outlasted human dynasties, and built a kingdom that survived by law instead of hunger. He had written treaties with shaking hands and enforced them with a steadiness that made monsters behave. He was the kind of ruler who did not enjoy fear, yet knew exactly how to wield it. Still, every night ended the same way, alone, listening to the castle breathe around him. Tonight, something else breathed too. Lucien paused outside a narrow corridor that led to the east wing. That wing had been sealed for decades, reopened only a month ago at his command. The corridor smelled faintly of lavender and warm milk, impossible scents for a fortress that lived on cold stone and discipline. It was as if someone had carried spring inside in their hands and refused to let it die. A soft murmur drifted under the door at the end of the hall. Not music, not prayer, a voice speaking as if the darkness could understand kindness. Lucian's fingers hovered near the carved wood. He did not knock. He never needed permission in his own castle. But tonight, he hesitated like a man who feared what he might hear. Behind him, a familiar presence approached with careful steps. "Your Majesty," said Lady Seraphine Duskrell, his advisor and the closest thing he had to a conscience that talked back. Her hair was silver-black, pinned with a single onyx comb. Her posture was perfectly composed, yet her eyes carried the unease of someone who had read a letter they wished they could burn. "The council has convened without you." Lucien didn't turn. "They convene because they're bored." "They convene," Seraphine corrected quietly, "because they believe you've become distracted." The word landed like a blade wrapped in velvet. Distracted. The polite way to say weakened. The polite way to say the vampire king had developed a soft spot big enough for enemies to crawl into. Lucian's gaze stayed on the door. "What do they want?" Seraphine's voice lowered. "They want certainty. They want the old rules. They want you to stop protecting her." A silence stretched, thick and living. Lucien finally turned his head. In the lamplight, his expression was calm, but something in his eyes flickered, an emotion so human it looked out of place in him. "And what do you want, Seraphine?" She didn't answer immediately. When she did, it was with a courage that cost her something. "I want you to remember who you are," she said, "and I want you to remember who you chose to be." Lucian's mouth tightened. "Those are no longer the same." Seraphine watched him for a long moment, then took a breath as if stepping off a ledge. "There's more," she said. "The physician returned from the village." Lucian's stillness sharpened, and Seraphine glanced at the door as if the walls might overhear. He confirmed it. The air felt suddenly too thin, as if the castle itself leaned closer to listen. Lucian's voice came out low, controlled, dangerous in its quiet. "Say it." The Seraphine swallowed. "She is with child." For a heartbeat, the world did not move. The torches did not crackle. The distant wind did not press against the windows. Even Seraphine seemed to freeze, waiting for the inevitable reaction, the rage, the denial, the cold dismissal of anything that dared threaten the order of the night. But Lucian didn't rage. He closed his eyes just for a moment, like someone enduring a wave that had been building far out at sea. When his eyes opened again, they looked brighter, not with cruelty, but with a terror he could not command. A child, he repeated, the word unfamiliar on his tongue. That's not possible. It is, Seraphine said softly, however impossible it should be. Lucian's gaze drifted, unfocused, as if he were seeing two futures at once, one in which the council crowned him more powerful than ever, and one in which he lost everything by choosing a fragile beating miracle. He had seen prophecies before. Most were lies dressed in poetry. But there was an old legend whispered through vampire courts like a bedtime warning: the child of night and dawn will unmake the throne. Some interpreted it as a threat, others as salvation. Every ambitious house wanted to control it. Every fearful house wanted to destroy it. Lucian had always dismissed it as superstition. Now it breathed behind a door at the end of a lavender-scented hallway. She doesn't know, Seraphine added quickly, her eyes searching his face. Not fully, she suspects, but she's been waiting for you. Lucian's jaw tightened. Waiting for me, he repeated, and the words sounded like a verdict. Because he understood what it meant to wait for a king who never promised anything, to hope for gentleness from someone trained to survive by taking, to place trust in a creature whose very existence made trust dangerous. He walked to the door, and this time his hand did not hesitate. The carved wood was warm, warmed from the inside like a hearth. Lucian opened it. The room beyond was small, but it had been softened. Curtains the color of pale moonlight, a thick rug, a basin of water that reflected candle flames like tiny suns. A window stood slightly open, letting in a ribbon of cold air that stirred the curtains as if the night were breathing. By the bedside sat Elara Wynne. She was human. That fact alone was enough to make most vampires call her reckless to exist in a place like this. She was not dressed in silks or jewels. She wore a simple nightgown and a knitted shawl, and her hair was loosely braided, as if she had tried to be composed but had surrendered to fear halfway through. Yet she didn't look weak. Her hands were steady as they rested on the blanket. Her eyes, wide and brown and painfully alive, rose to meet Lucian's. They held no worship, no flattery, only something braver. Expectation. Lucian, she said, saying his name like it belonged to a man, not a myth. He should have corrected her. He should have demanded she call him Your Majesty, should have kept distance like a rule. That was what kings did. That was what vampires did. Instead, he stood there as if the room had stolen his ability to move. I smelled the lavender, he said, and immediately hated how small the sentence sounded compared to what was happening in his chest. Elara's mouth trembled into a faint, sad smile. You always notice the wrong things first. Lucian took one step closer, then another, careful as if he might break the air between them. Seraphine told me, he said. Elara's fingers tightened on the blanket. Then it's true, she whispered, not as a triumph, but as if speaking it aloud made it more real and more terrifying. Her eyes flicked down, then back up, pleading without begging. I didn't plan it, I didn't trap you, I didn't even know it could happen, I just started feeling different, like my body was keeping a secret from me. Lucian's throat worked. He wanted to say, I can fix this. He wanted to say, I can make the fear go away. Power had always offered him a solution. But there were things power only ruined. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The pulse at her throat, the warmth in her cheeks, the fragile brilliance of a life that ended too quickly even without monsters in the world. And now inside her, another life, smaller, quieter, utterly helpless. A child. His child. The thought hit him like sunrise behind closed eyelids. Elara's voice broke the silence. I'm not asking you to love me, she said, every word measured, careful not to demand what he might not be able to give. I'm not even asking you to stay. Lucian's eyes sharpened. Then what are you asking? Elara inhaled, and her courage showed in the way she didn't look away. I'm asking you not to turn this into a war, she said, because I can feel it coming, in the servant's silence, in the way the castle listens. Your world is moving around me like a blade, Lucien, and whatever this is, whatever it means, it shouldn't cost innocent lives." Lucian's hands clenched at his sides. Innocent lives. She spoke of them as if they mattered, even here, even now, even surrounded by beings who had spent centuries pretending innocence was a childish story. "I can protect you," he said, and the promise sounded like both an oath and a confession. Elara's eyes glistened. "From who?" she asked softly. "Your enemies or your own throne?" The question landed perfectly, cruelly precise. Lucian's gaze drifted past her to the window where the night pressed close. Somewhere beyond these walls, the council gathered, sharpening their opinions into weapons. Somewhere beyond these walls, ambitious houses would pay fortunes for a rumor like this. Somewhere beyond these walls, dawn waited like a patient judge. Lucian had always believed he was built for darkness. But Alara's presence pulled a hidden part of him toward something else, toward responsibility, toward tenderness, toward choices that didn't come with applause. He stepped closer to the bed. Slowly, with the care of someone handling a sacred object, he reached out, not to her throat, not to claim, but to lay his palm on the blanket near her hand. He did not touch her skin without permission. That was the kind of restraint no one ever wrote songs about, yet it was the hardest thing he had ever learned. Alara's breath hitched. Then, with trembling bravery, she placed her hand over his. Lucian felt the heat of her through the fabric and beneath it. Faint, impossibly faint, another rhythm like a secret drum far away. His eyes widened. He could hear it. Not just her heartbeat. A second one. The room tilted, as if the castle itself had shifted under him. "Elara," he whispered, voice rough. "Do you understand what they'll do if they find out? The council doesn't fear you, they fear what you carry." Elara's tears spilled silently, but her chin lifted. "Then choose," she whispered back. "Choose what kind of king you are." A knock thundered against the door, hard, urgent, not the polite tap of a servant. Seraphine's voice cut through the wood, tight with alarm. "Your Majesty," she called, "they're here. The council brought the crimson decree." Lucian's hand tightened over Elara's, not crushing, anchoring. His eyes met hers, and in them lived a decision forming like a storm. Outside, boots shifted. More than one person. A faint scrape of metal against stone, symbolic, ceremonial, threatening without needing to be used. Elara's voice was barely audible. "Lucian, what is the crimson decree?" Lucian stared at the door as if it were the mouth of fate itself. "It's the law," he said, each word heavy. "The one even kings are expected to obey." Another knock, louder, finals. And for the first time in centuries, the vampire king felt something colder than death crawl up his spine. Because the law was about to ask for a sacrifice. And behind him, in a lavender-scented room, a second heartbeat kept trying to exist, the hallway filled with the smell of old parchment and winter rain as the door shuddered under a final, impatient knock. Candlelight bent across polished stone, and the shadows outside Elara's room seemed to stand in formation. Lucian stepped away from the bedside without letting go of Elara's hand until the last possible moment. His fingers slid free slowly, like a promise he couldn't speak aloud with witnesses breathing on the other side of the wood. "Stay behind me," he murmured, not as an order, but as a plea wrapped in authority. Elara's eyes searched his face, trying to read the future in it. She nodded once, brave and trembling at the same time, and pulled her shawl tighter as if warmth could be manufactured by will. Lucian opened the door. Three figures stood in the corridor, cloaked in ceremonial black, their collars pinned with crimson enamel that caught the light like dried roses. Between them was a lacquered case, carried level and careful as if it held something fragile. It didn't, it held something sharp. Seraphine was beside them, not restrained but surrounded, an advisor forced into the shape of a warning. Her gaze flicked to Lucian, and the smallest movement of her head said what her mouth could not. "They came ready to corner you." The eldest counselor, Lord Marius Vane, inclined his head with the politeness of a man who had never needed to be kind. His voice was smooth, practiced. Your Majesty, forgive the hour. The law does not sleep simply because the castle wishes to dream. Lucian's expression didn't change, but the air did. It thickened around him as if the night itself leaned closer to hear him decide what he was willing to become. You bring law to a sick room, he said quietly. Choose your next words carefully. Marius gestured to the case. Another counselor opened it, revealing a rolled scroll bound in red thread and sealed with wax so dark it looked almost black. The seal bore the sigil of the Crimson Decree, an old rule from older fear, written for moments when vampire society panicked and called it prudence. We bring procedure, Marius replied. A human resides in the East Wing, under your protection, under our concern, there are reports. Lucian's gaze was steady, but his senses were not. He could still hear that second heartbeat from behind him, faint as a secret prayer. It made every word from the council feel too loud, too careless. Seraphine took a small step forward. The council requests your presence in the Hall of Vows, she said, voice controlled, eyes pleading for him to keep Elara out of this corridor. They want a formal reading. Lucian understood the game. They wanted him away from Elara. They wanted distance, isolation, a moment where loneliness could do what weapons couldn't. He lifted his chin. You will not enter this room, he said, letting his voice turn colder without letting his heart follow. If there will be a reading, it happens where I can hear it without her hearing it. Marius's eyes narrowed a fraction. If she is involved, she must be present. Lucian didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. No. The word landed with the weight of a crown dropped onto stone. For a moment, even the counselors hesitated, not because they were afraid of violence. Lucian did not rule by tantrum, but because they could feel something worse than rage taking shape, the kind of quiet resolve that rewrites kingdoms. Lucian turned slightly, just enough to meet Elara's gaze over his shoulder. Lock the door after me, he whispered. Do not open it for anyone but Seraphine. Elara's throat moved as she swallowed fear. Lucian, she began, but he was already stepping into the hall, already placing his body between her warmth and their cold tradition. Seraphine fell into step beside him as they walked, their footfalls muted by thick rugs that had witnessed centuries of decisions. They will push, she said under her breath. They'll paint it as mercy. They'll call control protection. Lucian's eyes stayed forward. And if I refuse? Seraphine's mouth tightened. Then they'll call you unfit. They'll try to take the story from you because they can't take the truth. The Hall of Vows waited like a chapel built for monsters who missed faith. Tall pillars rose into shadow. Iron chandeliers held candles that gave off a faint scent of clove and smoke. Along the walls hung banners of noble houses, each one a reminder that Lucian's throne was less a seat than a bargain, upheld by fragile loyalty and older grudges. The council arranged themselves in a half circle. The scroll was placed on a lectern as if it were holy. Lucian stood alone opposite them, his cape falling straight, his hands empty on purpose. No weapon, no symbol, no performance. Just a king and the price of being one. Marius broke the seal. The wax cracked softly. The sound was small, but it went through the room like thunder. The Crimson Decree, Marius read, exists to preserve stability when an anomaly threatens the balance of night. Lucian didn't blink. Call it what it is, he said. It exists to preserve power when fear gets embarrassed. A ripple moved through the council, not laughter, offense. One of the younger counselors, Lady Isolde Rain, leaned forward, her voice sharp with certainty. It exists because history repeats itself, Your Majesty, because compassion has consequences. Lucian's gaze shifted to her, and for an instant, something human flashed across his face, hurt. Not at her accusation, at how easy it was for them to say compassion like it was a flaw. Marius continued reading, voice unhurried. If a human carries blood tied to the royal line, the council may invoke guardianship. The mother may be relocated for her safety. The child will be raised under supervision to ensure. Lucian's control tightened, visible only in the way his jaw set. To ensure obedience, he corrected. To ensure ownership. Isolde snapped the scroll lightly, as if the paper itself could enforce truth. To ensure survival. Do you believe the other houses will simply accept this? Do you believe hunters will not come? Do you believe your enemies will not use the child as a blade? Lucian held her gaze. I believe you're already trying to. The chamber chilled. Marius lifted his chin. This is not an accusation, it is procedure. The council offers a path that avoids bloodshed. Lucian's voice softened, and that softness carried more danger than a threat. Do not speak to me about avoiding bloodshed, he said. I built this kingdom so you could say those words without laughing. Seraphine's eyes flicked to him, a quiet recognition. This was what most never saw in Lucien Valebryn. He didn't crave purity because he knew he wasn't pure. He craved better. He craved fewer broken people left behind by his reign. Marius folded the scroll with reverence. Then make the responsible choice, allow guardianship. The mother will be cared for, the child will be protected, your throne remains stable. Lucian stepped closer to the lectern, close enough to smell the parchment's age. And what happens when the child grows? He asked. When it asks for its mother, when it asks why it was treated like a problem to manage. Isolde's voice dropped, almost sincere. It will thank us for saving it from chaos. Lucian's eyes darkened with an emotion that wasn't anger but grief. No, he said, it will learn to fear love, and it will call that lesson tradition. Well, for the first time, Marius's patience thinned. You are not thinking like a king. Lucian didn't flinch. I am, he replied. I'm thinking like the kind of king I promised this realm I would be. He reached into his cloak and drew out a small ring of black metal, plain, unadorned, the kind of object most would overlook. He set it on the lectern with care. Seraphine's breath caught because she recognized it. Marius recognized it too. His eyes widened a fraction. The night vow ring, he whispered, the words edged with disbelief. Lucian nodded. The oath my line used before thrones were built on fear, the oath that binds a king to restraint. Isolde stared. That ring was retired for a reason. Lucian's gaze never left the council. Because it limits power, he said, and power hates limits. He touched the ring with 2 fingers and spoke with a calm that felt like a blade being laid down on purpose. I will take the night vow, he said, publicly. I will bind myself to the oldest law we have: no feeding without consent, no punishment without trial, no taking what is not freely offered. I will accept oversight of my conduct if it keeps her from being taken. A murmur rolled through the chamber, not approval, shock, because Lucian wasn't offering a compromise. He was offering himself, his power, his pride, the very weapon they assumed he would use. Seraphine's eyes shone, but she didn't smile. She looked like someone watching a man step into fire to keep others warm. Marius recovered first. That oath would weaken you, he said carefully, as if speaking to a child about danger. It would invite challenges, it would. It would make me accountable, Lucian finished. And if my rule cannot survive accountability, then my rule is a lie. A silence, heavy and stunned. Then Lady Isolde stood, slow and deliberate. Very noble, she said, voice like frost. But you misunderstand, the decree is not only about you. She lifted her hand, and a council scribe stepped forward with a second document. Newer parchment, fresh ink, and seals from houses Lucian did not control. Isolde's eyes held something close to pity, and that was what made it terrifying. The Crimson Decree has already been invoked, she said. Not by us alone, by the noble houses. They have signed. The process is in motion. Lucian's chest tightened. In motion, he repeated, tasting the words like poison. Marius's tones softened into something almost regretful. At midnight, a party will arrive to escort the mother to sanctuary. If you interfere, they will declare it rebellion. If you resist, they will call it tyranny. Either way, the kingdom fractures. Lucian stood perfectly still, and Seraphine watched him the way you watch a door in a storm, praying the hinges hold. He turned without another word and strode from the Hall of Vows, cape trailing behind him like night chasing its own shadow. Seraphine followed, her steps faster now, her composure cracking at the edges. Neither of them spoke as they moved through the corridors because speech would not change what waited. When they reached Elara's door, Lucien's hand paused on the handle. The corridor smelled wrong. No lavender, no warm milk, just cold air and the faint, sharp bite of snow. His stomach tightened with a dread so human it almost made him angry at himself for feeling it. He pushed the door open. The room was empty. The bed covers were folded back as if someone had stood up carefully, trying not to leave evidence of panic. Elara's knitted shawl lay on the chair, abandoned. The candle by the window had burned low, its flame trembling in the draught. And the window, slightly open now, let in a ribbon of night so cold it felt like a hand on the throat. Lucien crossed the room in 3 silent steps. On the bedside table sat a single folded note, weighted by a small sprig of lavender. His fingers hovered over it for a heartbeat, as if touching it would make the truth irreversible. Seraphine came up behind him, voice barely there. "Lucien." He unfolded the paper. Elara's handwriting was uneven, as if she'd written it while trying not to cry. "I won't be the war that destroys what you built. If they want me, they'll come for me. So I'm leaving before they can make you choose between your people and your child." Lucien's vision sharpened, the room suddenly too bright, too loud, too empty. His hand tightened around the note, not crushing it, holding it like it was the last warm thing in the castle. Then he heard it. Not her heartbeat. Nothing at all. The second heartbeat, the one that had anchored him, was gone from his senses, swallowed by distance and night. Lucien stared out the open window into the black, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough to sound like prayer and threat at once. "They've already reached her," he whispered. And somewhere far below, in the dark beyond the walls, a carriage bell rang once, soft, secretive, like the kingdom itself was slipping something precious out of his hand. Snow didn't fall that night, but the cold still moved like a living thing, slipping under Lucien's collar and into the quiet places a king never admitted existed. The courtyard gates opened without ceremony, and the castle behind him looked less like a fortress and more like a mistake he could no longer hide inside. Lucien Valebryn walked out on foot. No carriage, no guards, no banners. Just a dark cloak, the night vow ring pressed against his palm, and a single thought that kept tearing through him like a prayer that refused to become peace. Elara had left to spare him a war, and the kingdom had answered her courage with theft disguised as sanctuary. He could taste the lie in the air, sharp as smoke. Seraphine matched his pace in silence, her breath pale in the moonlight. She didn't ask if he was certain because she could see the change in him already. This wasn't the vampire king going to conquer. This was a man going to beg fate for one more chance to be decent. At the outer road, Lucien crouched and touched the ground. The dirt was frozen hard, but the impressions were clear. Fresh wheels, a heavy carriage, and many boots. Too many for a protective escort. The tracks cut away from the main road, toward the low valley where old ruins slept under snow and the trees grew close together as if they were trying to keep secrets warm. "They didn't take the king's route," Seraphine murmured, studying the direction. "They took the hidden one." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Because they didn't want witnesses," he said, and he hated how calm he sounded. They followed the tracks into the forest. The pines were thick, their needles holding the last scent of resin and winter. Every so often, Lucien stopped, not for strategy, but because his senses kept reaching for that second heartbeat like a hand searching for another hand in darkness. Each time he found only silence, it felt like an accusation. Seraphine watched him carefully. "You can still turn back," she said, gentle but real. "You can call the guard, raise the banners, make this official." Lucien shook his head once. "That would make her a battlefield," he replied. "I won't build a future for my child out of other people's fear." The words surprised even him, not because he didn't believe them, but because he had finally spoken them aloud. "My child." He felt the phrase settle into his chest, heavy and warm, like a lantern being lit in a place he'd kept empty for centuries. As they neared the valley road, a sound drifted through the trees, thin, human, and terrified. Not a scream, not loud enough. More like someone trying not to be heard while failing. Seraphine's hand went to the hidden dagger at her waist. Lucien lifted his palm, stopping her. They stepped through the brush and found a small wagon tipped sideways near a shallow ravine. A young man lay half in the snow, one ankle pinned under a broken wheel. His face was gray with cold. His eyes widened when he saw Lucien, as if he recognized danger before understanding it. Please, the man rasped. Don't. Lucien knelt, careful and slow, like his speed might turn fear into panic. You're hurt, he said quietly. If you keep bleeding into the cold, you won't last the hour. The man tried to pull away. I know what you are, he whispered, voice shaking. I've heard. Lucien didn't correct him. He didn't soften it with lies. He simply reached for the broken wheel, braced his shoulder against the wood, and lifted with a controlled strength that made the snow crunch and the axle creak. Seraphine slid in and freed the man's ankle with swift, practiced hands. When the man was loose, Lucien tore a strip of cloth from his own sleeve and wrapped the ankle snugly. His fingers didn't tremble, but his expression did something stranger. It softened, not with pity, but with respect. You'll live, Lucien said, but you need shelter. The man stared at him, stunned. Why help me? Lucien paused, as if he'd been asked the hardest question in the world. Because I remember what it felt like, he answered, to be on the ground and realize no one was coming. For a moment, the forest went quiet in a different way, as if the trees themselves were listening. The man swallowed, shame and relief twisting together on his face. Then he whispered, a black carriage passed here earlier. They didn't stop. There was a woman inside. She was crying, but not like she was fighting, like she was saying goodbye. Lucien's chest tightened. Which way? The man lifted a shaking finger. Toward the old stone house, he said, the one with the silver lanterns. Seraphine's gaze flicked to Lucien. Silver lanterns, she repeated, voice low. That's not a safe house, that's a ward mark, old kind. Lucien rose slowly, the night vow ring cold against his skin. They're taking her to a place I can't enter, he said. They left the man with a small pouch of coins Seraphine pressed into his hand and directions to the nearest village. He tried to refuse, then accepted with wet eyes as if kindness had caught him unprepared. Farther down the valley, the trees thinned, revealing a structure half swallowed by time. A low stone compound sat against the hillside, its walls pale under moonlight. Silver lanterns hung from iron hooks along the gate, each flame steady despite the wind, each one reflecting a faint shimmer etched into the metal. Wards! Lucien stopped at the edge of the grounds. He didn't need to touch the boundary to feel it. The air itself resisted him, like invisible hands pressing against his chest. Not burning, not painful, just absolute. A line drawn long ago by someone who believed monsters could only be managed by keeping them out. Seraphine exhaled through her nose, anger controlled into something sharp. They planned it well. Lucien stared at the gate, and the humility in him rose like a bitter tide. No, he said softly. They planned it for the kind of king I used to be, the kind who would break the gate and prove their fear was right. From inside the compound came a muffled sound. Voices, human voices, moving with urgency. A lantern bobbed near an inner doorway, and Lucien caught a glimpse of a woman in a plain cloak being guided down a corridor. Even at that distance, even through warded air, he knew the shape of her shoulders, the way she held herself when she was trying not to fall apart. Elara, he breathed, the name turning raw in his throat. Seraphine's hand hovered near the boundary, then dropped helpless. If you cross, the wards will scream, she warned. They'll alert everyone in the compound, and the council will call it an attack. Lucien's eyes didn't leave the moving lantern inside. Then I won't cross, he said. Seraphine looked at him, startled. Lucien. He turned to her, and the moonlight caught his face in a way it never did in the castle halls. There was no mask left, no royal distance, only a terrifying sincerity. "I will not take her freedom," he said, "not even to save her. If I become the thing she feared, I lose her either way." The Seraphine swallowed hard. "So what do we do?" Lucien glanced around the compound's outer wall. A narrow service door sat farther down, guarded by two men with spears and heavy cloaks. Not soldiers in shining armor, just hired hands. Humans doing a job for a coin they probably needed. Lucien's voice dropped to a near whisper. "We ask," he said. Seraphine frowned, as if the word itself didn't belong in this world. "Ask who?" Before Lucien could answer, the service door opened from inside. A figure stepped out carrying a bucket, pausing as if sensing eyes on the dark. She was older, wrapped in a thick shawl, her hair pinned back in a tight bun. A healer's posture. A woman used to blood and birth and fear, but not controlled by them. She lifted her lantern higher and looked straight into the trees where Lucien stood. Her gaze didn't widen in surprise, it narrowed in recognition. Then she raised her free hand and made a small, deliberate gesture toward the shadows, two fingers touching her lips, then pointing inward. A silent sign that meant only one thing. "I know you're there, and I'm willing to talk." Lucien took a slow step forward, stopping just short of the ward line. The lantern light painted silver along the invisible boundary, like frost on glass. The healer's voice carried softly through the cold. "King of Noctavir," she called, not mocking, not afraid. "If you've come to tear this place apart, leave now, I won't help you." Lucien held his hands open at his sides, empty. "I didn't come to tear anything apart," he said. His voice was steady, but it cost him. "I came because a woman inside your walls is alone, and she should not be." The healer's eyes flicked toward the inner corridor, then back to him. "She's not alone," she said, and there was something complicated in her tone, protective, conflicted. "She has guards, she has food, she has a bed." Lucian's throat tightened. "That's not what I meant." For a moment, the healer's face softened, and the lantern trembled slightly in her grip as if her own certainty had shifted. "You can't enter," she reminded him, almost gently. "These wards were built for a reason." Lucien nodded once. "I know," he said. "So I'm asking you to carry a message. Tell Elara I'm here. Tell her I will not force her to see me. But if she wants me to take responsibility, if she wants me to stand beside her without turning her life into a war, I will do it." Seraphine stared at him, as if hearing a king speak like that felt like watching a mountain choose to kneel. The healer studied Lucien for a long time. Then she said very quietly, "Responsibility doesn't always look like rescue, King Valebryn. Sometimes it looks like surrender." Lucian's eyes darkened. "Surrender what?" he asked, already feeling the answer in his bones. The healer's voice dropped even lower, and the words hit like a locked door. "Your throne," she said. "That is what they want, not the woman, not only the child." Lucian went still. Inside the compound, deeper than the hallway voices, a sound rose faintly. Elara's voice, soft and broken, speaking to someone Lucien couldn't see. Not crying now, pleading. Then another voice answered her, calm and official, carrying the cold comfort of rules. "You will sign," the voice said, "and the child will be placed where it belongs." Lucian's hands curled slowly into fists at his sides, not to strike but to keep himself from shaking. The Seraphine's whisper trembled with anger. "They're making her choose." Lucian stared at the warded gate, his heart a storm behind a still face. The healer took one step back toward the service door, as if preparing to disappear into the compound again. "I can get you 1 minute," she said, eyes fixed on his. 1 minute where she can see you from the threshold. No wards broken, no alarms, no blood, just truth. Lucian's voice came out rough. "What do you want in return?" The healer hesitated, and when she spoke, her words were heavy with warning. "If she asks you to give up your crown," she said, "you must answer her honestly, not as a king, as a man." Lucian swallowed, feeling the castle, the council, the entire night world pull on him like chains. Then the service door creaked open behind the healer and a guard's voice snapped suspicious. "Mara, who are you talking to?" The healer's lantern jerked, throwing wild shadows across the wall. Her eyes flashed once, urgent. Lucien took a single step into the open moonlight, just enough for the guard to see the outline of him beyond the ward line, and the guard froze like the night had grown teeth. The Seraphine's breath caught, because the guard didn't raise his spear. He lifted a small horn to his lips, and Lucien realized too late that this 1 minute might have been a trap meant to force his hand. The horn began to sound, low and rising, and inside the compound Elara's pleading voice cut off as doors slammed shut. The horn's low call rolled over the valley like fog, and every silver lantern along the compound gate seemed to sharpen its light. Somewhere inside, boots struck stone in quick, organized patterns, the sound of a place snapping shut around a single secret. Lucien didn't move forward. He didn't bare fangs or throw himself at the wards in a burst of pride. He simply stood in the open, letting the moon paint his face clearly enough that no one could mistake him for a shadow. "Izzy," he called, voice carrying into the courtyard without becoming a shout. "No one here is in danger from me." Two more guards rushed in, then four. Spears lifted, hands shaking under wool gloves, eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from stories told too often at tavern tables. One of them was young, barely older than boyhood, and his spear tip trembled in a way that made Lucien's chest tighten. Not because he feared the weapon, but because he recognized the fear behind it. Lucien angled his body slightly, placing himself between the ward line and the guards, as if he were protecting them from the worst thing they could become, people who hurt someone just because they were told to. Seraphine stayed a step behind him. Her face was still, but her eyes burned, watching every twitch of every hand. The service door banged open again. The healer, Mara, appeared for a single heartbeat, her lantern raised. She looked at Lucien with something urgent and pained, and then a man in a dark coat grabbed her arm and yanked her back inside. The door slammed, metal latch ringing like a verdict. Lucien's fingers curled, not into a strike, but into restraint so strong it looked like stillness. A guard shouted, trying to sound brave, "You can't be here, step away from the boundary." "I am stepping away," Lucien replied, and he did, 2 measured steps back from the invisible line, palms open at his sides. "I won't cross, I won't force your hand." The young guard blinked at him, confused by the lack of threat, confused by the way the monster in his mind refused to appear. From inside the compound, the sound of hurried voices rose and fell, orders, keys, bolts turning. A window shutter snapped closed, then another. The place wasn't just alarmed, it was being sealed. Seraphine leaned in, barely moving her lips. "Lock down," she whispered, "they're corralling her." Lucien stared at the barred windows as if he could see through wood with sheer devotion. "They're not protecting her," he murmured back. "They're protecting their claim." A boot slipped on a patch of ice near the gate, and the young guard lurched, spear clattering against the stone. Instinct pulled him forward, straight toward the ward line, then stopped him as his companions grabbed his coat. Lucien moved before anyone could think to interpret it as aggression. He stepped toward the fallen spear, stopped well short of the boundary, and gently nudged the weapon back across the snow with the toe of his boot. "You dropped this," he said, calm and almost kind. "Hold it steady, not because you'll need it for me, because your fear will try to make you do something you'll regret." The words hit the guards in a strange way, not like a threat, like advice a father might give a son before a storm. A heavier voice answered from behind them, "Sweet words don't change old rules." Lord Marius Vane emerged from the trees with Lady Isolde Rain at his side, their cloaks immaculate, their faces composed as if they'd been invited. Behind them came 3 council retainers carrying a sealed case and a length of chain wrapped in velvet, ceremonial restraint presented as dignity. Isolde's gaze flicked over Lucien, sharp and satisfied. "You came," she said softly, "how predictable." Lucien didn't rise to it, his eyes stayed on the compound. "Where is she?" he asked. Marius smiled as if offering comfort. Safe, he said, and soon compliant. You've saved us the trouble of hunting you through your own kingdom. The Seraphine's voice cut in, controlled but bright with warning. You invoked the decree on false pretenses. This sanctuary is an ambush. Marius shrugged with the calm of a man who believed history belonged to those who wrote it. Sanctuary is whatever the council declares it to be. Lucien finally looked at them fully, and the night seemed to steady around him. Then declare this, he said. I will come with you peacefully, no resistance, no spectacle. Isolde's eyes narrowed. In exchange for what? Lucien's throat tightened. He tasted iron in the cold air, not from blood, but from the cruelty of bargaining with lives. In exchange for Elara leaving this place unharmed, he said, and untouched by your papers and threats. Marius's expression shifted, almost amused. You think you can negotiate from outside the gate? Lucien reached into his cloak and drew out the night vow ring. In the moonlight, it looked plain, nearly worthless, until you understood what it represented: a king volunteering to be smaller. He held it up for them to see. I will take the night vow in the Hall of Vows, he said. I will submit my rule to restraint and record. I will accept a public trial of conduct if that is what your frightened little hearts require. Isolde's lips parted slightly. She hadn't expected him to offer them the one thing they always pretended to want: accountability. And if we refuse, she asked. Lucien's eyes didn't harden. They softened, and that softness carried a kind of courage most rulers never touched. Then you will prove this was never about safety, he said. It was about control. Behind the compound walls, a muffled thud echoed like furniture dragged across stone. Another sound followed, a woman's voice, stifled and shaking, trying not to rise into panic. Elara. Lucien's breath caught so sharply it hurt. He took a step toward the compound without thinking, then stopped himself as the ward line pressed back against his senses like a firm hand on his chest. Elara, he called, voice breaking at the edges despite his effort. I'm here, I'm not leaving. Isolde watched him with something close to satisfaction. Call for her all you like, she said. She won't answer. She's being reminded of the cost of loving a king. Inside, the sounds shifted, feet running now quick and light, not armored. Then, just for an instant, a narrow upper window shutter loosened. A sliver of candlelight spilled out, and Lucien saw her face between the bars. Elara. Her eyes were wide, shining with fear and anger and something fierce enough to keep her standing. One hand pressed protectively to her belly. The other clutched a sheet of parchment, fresh ink, a seal waiting for a signature. Lucien lifted his hand slowly, like he was approaching a frightened animal, like he was begging the world not to make her flinch. Don't sign, he whispered, though the distance made it a hope more than a command. Please, whatever they promise, don't. Elara shook her head once, sharp and trembling. She opened her mouth, but before words could reach him, a figure moved behind her and yanked the shutter closed. Darkness swallowed the sliver of her face, leaving only the memory of her eyes. Lucien's chest tightened into something almost unbearable. Seraphine's voice cracked, quiet with helpless fury. They're forcing her. Marius stepped forward, holding the velvet-trapped chain like a gift. Enough, he said. Come with us now, and the mother will remain comfortable. Lucien stared at the chain, then at the warded compound, then at the snow where Elara's path had vanished into the night. His mind tried to split itself in two: king and man, power and responsibility. But the second heartbeat he'd heard earlier seemed to pull him toward the only decision he could live with. He held out his wrists. I will go, Lucien said, voice steady despite the ruin it carried. But you will not use me as leverage to break her. If she is harmed because I obeyed you tonight, I will spend whatever remains of my eternity undoing everything you think you've built. Isolde's smile returned, thin as ice. So dramatic, she murmured and nodded to the retainers. The chain was placed around Lucien's wrists with practiced care. No cruelty, no spectacle, just a cold certainty that made it worse. One retainer avoided looking him in the eyes. Another looked and looked away quickly, ashamed of his own relief. As they turned Lucien toward the forest road, a small door within the compound opened for a breath of time, just a crack. Mara slipped out, alone, lantern lowered, moving like someone trying to keep her soul from being noticed. Her gaze darted to Lucien. She didn't speak. She couldn't. But she lifted her hand and pressed 2 fingers to her lips, then pointed, not inward this time. Outward, toward the rear of the compound, where the hillside dipped and the ruins began. A hidden way. A chance. Lucian's heart lurched, hope stabbing through him so suddenly it almost brought him to his knees. He met Mara's eyes and gave the smallest nod, the kind of nod that said, I understand. I trust you. Go. Mara vanished back through the crack of the door, swallowed by stone and secrecy. Seraphine's breath hitched as she realized it too. She's helping Elara, she whispered. She's moving her. Marius tightened his grip on the chain. Walk, your majesty. Lucien let himself be led step by step away from the compound and into the trees. He didn't fight, he didn't shout. He kept his head high not out of pride but out of promise, because somewhere behind those warded walls, Elara was either being broken or being brave. And as the council's carriage came into view between the pines, Lucien did the only quiet, heroic thing he had left. He turned his head slightly, just enough for Seraphine to read his lips. Find her, he mouthed. Protect her, even if I'm not there. The Seraphine's eyes shone, and she nodded once. Then the carriage door swung open, dark as a throat, and Lucien stepped inside without being pushed. Oh, the latch snapped shut. Outside, the forest swallowed the sound of wheels turning. One road carrying the vampire king toward judgment, and another hidden road, somewhere behind the compound, carrying a frightened woman and a fragile future into the night. Lucien closed his eyes, reached with every sense he had, and listened. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, so faint he almost doubted himself, he felt it again. A second heartbeat. The carriage rocked over frozen ruts, and every sway pulled the chain a little tighter against Lucien's wrists. The iron wasn't meant to hurt him, not really. It was meant to remind him that the kingdom could still pretend it owned his choices. Across from him, Lord Marius sat with his gloved hands folded, as if escorting a guest to a banquet instead of dragging a king toward judgment. Lady Isolde's gaze stayed on Lucien's face, watching for anger the way some people watch for weather. You could have stayed in your castle, Isolde said at last, voice almost conversational. You could have let the decree do its work. Lucien stared at the dark window where the night passed like a river, and listened to her cry through walls I paid to build. He replied, quiet, no. Marius tilted his head. So you admit the human matters more than stability. Lucien's answer came without heat, and that was what made it dangerous. I admit she matters, he said, and if your stability requires cruelty to a pregnant woman, then it was never stability, it was fear wearing a crown. When the carriage rolled under the gates of Castle Noctavir, the torches flared brighter than usual. Servants stood in rigid lines, faces lowered. No one spoke, not because they didn't care, because they did, and caring was risky tonight. The Hall of Vows had been prepared like a courtroom disguised as a cathedral. Candles burned in strict rows. Banners hung freshly straightened, as if the council believed order could be ironed into existence. The crimson decree sat on the lectern again, sealed anew, polished into something that looked righteous. Lucien was led in and positioned at the center, where every eye could weigh him. The Seraphine was not there. That absence hit him harder than the chain. He kept his face calm, but inside him something strained, reaching outward, searching for her presence, and for that second heartbeat he still felt only in faint, distant pulses. Moving, alive, not close enough. Marius lifted a hand and the room quieted. We convene under the Crimson Decree, he announced. A human has carried an anomaly into our realm. The king has acted outside counsel, outside procedure, and outside fear, Lucien interrupted, voice steady. A ripple ran through the nobles. Isolde's mouth tightened, but Marius continued as if Lucien were a stubborn child. The council demands guardianship of the child. The council demands relocation of the mother. The council demands. Lucien raised his chained hands, not in defiance, but in a strange, simple request to speak. "Then hear my demand," he said. The hall stilled again. Even those who hated him lined in because kings weren't supposed to plead. They were supposed to command. Lucian's gaze moved across faces he'd known for centuries, some loyal, some ambitious, most exhausted by their own hunger for certainty. "Elara is not an object of policy," he said. "My child is not a prize for frightened houses to fight over. If you want a kingdom that survives, you stop treating life like property." Isolde laughed softly. "And what are you offering, Lucien? More pretty laws, another treaty written on air?" Lucian's throat tightened, and when he spoke again, something raw showed through the royal calm. "I am offering you what you've always pretended to want from me," he said. "A limit." He nodded to the lectern. "Bring the night vow rings." Marius's eyes narrowed. "That oath is archaic." "It's honest," Lucien replied. A servant stepped forward with the plain black ring on a velvet cushion. Lucien looked at it like a man looking at the edge of a cliff he has decided to step off. "I will take the night vow publicly," he said, "and I will abdicate temporarily if that is what it takes to keep the council from touching her." The hall didn't gasp, it went colder, because abdication wasn't politics, it was surrender, and no one in that room had expected surrender from him. Marius leaned forward, voice gentle in the way a knife can be gentle. "You would abandon the throne for a human." Lucian's eyes didn't lower. "I would abandon the throne for what is right," he said, "and if you can't tell the difference, that is the rot you've been calling tradition." For the first time, a younger noble on the left side stood, uncertain but brave enough to be seen. "If he takes the night vow," the noble said, "he binds himself. He can't hide behind power. Isn't that what we demanded?" Isolde shot him a look that made him sit back down, but the question had landed. The hall began to feel less like a verdict and more like a wound being opened. Then the side doors creaked, and a guard entered with someone Lucien didn't recognize at first, the young man from the compound, the one whose spear had fallen, the one Lucien had spoken to like a person instead of a threat. The boy's cheeks were wind-red, eyes wide, hands clenched at his sides. He looked like he regretted walking in and doing it anyway. Marius's voice sharpened. "Why is he here?" The guard swallowed. "He requested to testify, my lord." Isolde scoffed. "About what?" The boy's voice shook, but he forced the words out. "About the king," he said, "about what he did not do." A tense silence spread, the kind of silence that comes when truth is about to embarrass power. "He didn't cross the ward line," the boy said, louder now, gaining strength with each word. "He stepped back when we told him to. He gave my spear back instead of taking it. He told me not to let fear make me cruel." A murmur ran through the hall, not approval, confusion, because monsters in old stories never returned spears, they took throats. Lucian's chest tightened. He hadn't helped the boy to earn this. He'd helped him because the boy was afraid, and now that small kindness had walked into the Hall of Vows and demanded to be counted. Isolde's eyes flashed. "You were charmed," she snapped. The boy flinched, then steadied. "No, my lady," he said, voice breaking on courage. "I was treated like I still had a soul." Lucien closed his eyes for a heartbeat, not in relief, but in something like grief. "This is how low we've fallen," he thought. "That decency looks like sorcery." Marius lifted a hand to restore order. "Testimony noted," he said coolly and turned back to Lucien as if swatting away a fly. "Your offer is dramatic, but it changes nothing." Lucien opened his eyes. "It changes everything," he said. "It changes the kind of kingdom we are." Marius's smile returned, smooth and practiced. "No," he replied, "because even if we accept your night vow, the decree still stands. The child will still be placed under council guardianship." Lucian's breath caught. For the first time, his calm faltered just enough that the hall could feel the man beneath the king. "You promised safety," he said, voice low, "not theft." Isolde's tone turned almost sweet. Safety and guardianship are the same thing when the asset is valuable. Asset. The word hit like a slap. Lucian's gaze lifted slowly, and something in him hardened, not into cruelty but into clarity. "Then take my crown," he said. "Strip my title, take my banners, if you must take my name, but you will not take her voice." Maria studied him. "And how do you intend to stop us?" Lucian's answer was quiet. "By refusing to be your excuse," he said. "You want a villain to justify what you're doing, I won't give you one." He nodded at the ring. "Let me take the night vow now," he said. "Let the kingdom witness it. Let every house know that if they touch the mother, they will be attacking not a monster, but a man bound by law and restraint." For a moment, even Isolde hesitated because public restraint was contagious. It made fear look petty. Marius's eyes shifted, calculating, and he gave a small nod to the scribe. "Very well," he said, "take your vow." A hush fell so complete that Lucian could hear individual candle wicks crackle. The ring was lifted from its cushion. Lucian held out his chained hands, and the scribe slid the night vow ring onto his finger with careful formality. The metal was cold, but it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a promise he had waited too long to make. Lucian spoke the vow clearly, each line a deliberate choice. "No taking without consent," he said. "No punishment without trial, no rule without accountability." As he finished, something subtle changed in the air, like the hall itself had decided to remember what oaths were for. A seraphine should have been there to see it. The thought burned. Marius stepped forward, voice ringing. "Then by the council's authority, King Lucien Valebryn is hereby placed under." The great doors at the back of the hall swung open. The cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of snow and pine and open road. Heads turned, cloaks shifted. A dozen hands moved toward hidden weapons that no one wanted to admit they carried. A woman stood in the doorway, breathless, cheeks flushed from the cold, hair damp with melted frost. "Elara." For a heartbeat, Lucian couldn't move. The world narrowed to her face and the fierce, trembling resolve in her eyes. She held something in her hand, Seraphine's signet ring, dark metal catching candlelight like a quiet signal flare. Elara's voice carried into the hall, shaking only once before it steadied. "I'm not an asset," she said. "I'm not your anomaly, and you will not decide my child's life without hearing my choice." Marius's mouth tightened. "How did you?" Elara took one step forward, lifting the signet ring higher. "Seraphine brought me this," she said, and her eyes locked onto Lucian's. "She told me what you were willing to give up." Lucian's chest tightened painfully at Seraphine's name, because if Elara was here, it meant Seraphine had stayed behind. Elara swallowed, then spoke words that made the candles seem to burn brighter. "I invoke sanctuary under the oldest law you forgot," she said. "The law that says a mother may choose her guardian." The hall erupted into murmurs, half outrage, half shock, because it sounded like legend, like something no one had expected to become real. Lucian's chains suddenly felt heavier, not because they restrained him, but because he couldn't reach her. He could only watch her stand in a room full of monsters and refuse to bow. Then Isolde's voice cut through the noise, thin and sharp. "If she invokes that law," she hissed to Marius, "we'll lose control." Marius's gaze flicked from Elara to Lucian, and a slow smile formed, one that didn't reach his eyes. "No," he murmured, "we'll gain it." He raised his hand, and the guards shifted, not toward Elara, but toward the doors behind her, sealing them. Lucian felt it instantly. The trap wasn't to keep Elara out. It was to keep her in. And as the doors boomed shut, Elara's eyes widened, not with fear for herself, but with sudden understanding of what she'd just walked into. The doors slammed with a sound that didn't just close wood on hinges, but closed power around a room like a fist. Elara stood frozen in the center aisle, the air rushing cold behind her, and the Hall of Vows suddenly felt smaller than a cage. Lucian's chains pulled tight as he stepped forward instinctively, stopping himself halfway because he knew what the council wanted. One sudden move, one flash of old violence, and they would have their villain again. They would have their excuse. Alara's fingers tightened around Seraphine's signet ring. Her other hand hovered near her belly, protective without thinking. She lifted her chin anyway, as if she decided fear would not get the final word in her life. Marius's voice was smooth as candle wax. "You see," he said to the nobles, spreading his hands like a priest. She walked into the hall, no force, no cruelty, only law. Isolde's eyes glittered. Now she will sign and we can all return to peace. Elara's gaze swept across the banners, the polished stone, the faces that watched her like a problem to solve. When she spoke, her voice didn't rise, but it carried because it was real. "You call it peace," she said, "but you mean silence. You mean a woman disappears and everyone sleeps better." A noble near the back shifted uncomfortably, as if a memory had been poked. Someone else looked down at their hands. Lucien finally spoke, and the room felt the difference between a king demanding and a man asking. "Elara," he said quietly, "I am here. I won't let them break you." Marius leaned forward as if savoring this. "You can't stop us, your majesty, not chained, not vowed, not outnumbered." Lucien looked at the night vow ring on his finger. The plain black metal caught the candlelight without shining, as if it refused to be flashy about doing the right thing. He lifted his hands, chain and all, so everyone could see it. "You're wrong," he said, voice steady. "This vow is the only reason I can stop you." Isolde laughed under her breath. "A vow doesn't unlock doors. It unlocks hearts," Lucien answered and turned his head slowly to the gathered houses. "The Hall of Vows exists for one purpose, to make truth heavier than fear. If you still believe in anything at all, then listen." He took a breath, and when he spoke again, he did not sound like someone defending himself. He sounded like someone finally telling the truth without bargaining. "I was made into a ruler by terror," he said, "and I kept this kingdom stable by learning to look unfeeling. But I will not raise my child inside the same lie. I will not let my throne teach another life that love is weakness and control is safety." The hall stayed silent, not because they agreed, because they were afraid to realize he meant it. Lucien turned his eyes to Elara. "You invoked the oldest law," he said gently. "Finish it." Elara swallowed, then lifted Seraphine's ring again like a key held up to the past. "The law says a mother may choose her guardian," she said, louder now, "and that choice must be heard without threat." Marius's smile thinned. "A charming legend," he said, "but legends don't bind councils." A quiet voice answered from the side of the hall. "It's not a legend." All heads turned. Seraphine Duskrell stepped into the candlelight as if she had walked out of the castle's own shadow. Her cloak was dusted with frost, her hair slightly undone, her face pale with exhaustion. Mara the healer stood behind her, lantern in hand, eyes clear and unafraid. Seraphine held a brittle, yellowed document sealed with wax so old it looked like stone. "This is the Mother's Sanctuary Clause," she said, "signed by the first houses, stored beneath this hall, forgotten on purpose." Marius's composure cracked for the first time. "You had no authority to remove that." "I did not remove it," Seraphine replied. Her voice didn't shake. "I requested it under the night vow, and because the night vow is older than your pride, the archivist complied." Isolde's gaze snapped to Lucien's ring, then back to Seraphine, calculating fast. "This is a stunt," she hissed. Mara stepped forward one pace, lantern steady. "It isn't," she said. "And if you try to pretend it is, you will have to explain why you used my warded sanctuary to frighten a pregnant woman into signing away her own child." A murmur rippled through the nobles, sharper now, more dangerous to the council than any blade. Scandal, when mixed with guilt, spread faster than fire. Seraphine unrolled the ancient clause with careful hands. The parchment crackled like old truth waking up. The clause states, Seraphine read, that within the Hall of Vows, any mother invoking sanctuary may name her guardian freely, and no house, council, or crown may compel a different choice without committing oath-breaking. Marius's jaw tightened. And who decides what is oath-breaking? Seraphine lifted her eyes. The hall does, she said simply. That is why it was built. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the candle flames along the aisle laned, as if the air itself had shifted direction. The sound was subtle, like a low, deep hum inside the stone, the kind you feel in your ribs more than here. The Hall of Vows, which had watched centuries of half-truths, felt suddenly awake. Lucien's chains went slack. Not falling away, just loosening, as if the metal itself had been reminded it was never meant to bind an oath-keeper inside this room. Lucien stared down at his wrists, shock flickering across his face. He hadn't asked for release, he had asked for truth, the hall had answered. Elara let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, and her eyes filled, not with weakness, but with the terrifying relief of someone who has been strong for too long. Marius recovered quickly, but his voice had changed. Fine, he snapped, the polish finally slipping. Choose then, choose your guardian. Elara's hand went to her belly again. She looked at the nobles, at the council, at the doors that had been slammed to trap her, and then she looked at Lucien. Lucien didn't reach for her. He didn't move closer to claim the moment. He only bowed his head slightly, giving her what he had rarely given anyone in his life. Control. You don't owe me anything, he said softly, so only she and the nearest listeners could truly hear it. Not because I'm king, not because I'm the father. If you choose someone else, I will still protect you from a distance that respects you. Elara's throat trembled. That, she whispered, is the first time you've sounded free. She turned to the hall and spoke clearly. I choose Lucien Valebryn, she said, then paused, eyes moving to Seraphine and Mara. And I choose Lady Seraphine Duskrell and Mara of the wards as witnesses and counsel, so my guardian is never allowed to become my jailer. A stunned silence fell, and then something unexpected happened. A noble in the second row stood and placed their hand over their heart. Another did the same, then another, not because they suddenly loved vampires or trusted miracles, but because they recognized what had just taken place. A mother had spoken, a king had stepped back, the hall had honored the difference. Isolde's face tightened with fury. This is sentimental theater. The younger noble who had spoken earlier rose again, voice stronger now. No, he said, this is the law we've been hiding behind while ignoring it. Marius lifted his hands as if to call guards, but the guards didn't move. They looked at one another uncertain, and in that uncertainty the council's true power showed itself. It depended on everyone agreeing not to question them. Lucien took one slow step forward, chains hanging loose now like a symbol that had failed. He did not smile, he did not gloat. I will not punish you, he said to Marius and Isolde. Not tonight, not in this hall. I am done building my reign out of fear. Isolde's voice went thin. Then you'll lose your throne. Lucien's eyes did not leave Elara. Then I will lose it, he said, and the quiet certainty in his tone landed harder than any threat, because my child will not inherit a crown bought with someone else's tears. A tremor passed through the room, not supernatural but human, the kind that comes when people realize the person with the most power is choosing to lay it down. Lucien reached up and removed the small circlet he had been forced to wear for ceremony, a piece of metal that had never meant as much as people claimed. He held it out, not to Marius, not to Isolde, but to the hall itself. I abdicate the throne of Noctavir, he said, until a regency is formed by open vote of the houses, witnessed by the night vow and bound by the mother's sanctuary clause. Gasps finally came, because this was not a move in a political game. This was a man cutting the rope around his own neck so someone else could breathe. The Seraphine's eyes shone and her voice softened. Lucien. He glanced at her. You told me to remember who I chose to be, he said. This is me remembering. Marius stepped forward, desperation sharpening him. You can't. I can, Lucien replied, and because I can, I must. He turned back to Elara, and something in his face, something ancient and tired, finally let go. He lowered himself onto one knee on the cold stone, not as a king performing humility, but as a man giving it honestly. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice broke on the truth. For every moment you were alone inside my world, for every silence that made you feel like you had to run, I can't change what I am, but I can change what I do. Elara walked to him. The entire hall held its breath as she reached out, trembling, and placed her hand against his cheek. Her warmth looked unreal against his stillness, like dawn touching night without either one dying. I don't want your power, she whispered. I want your presence. Lucien closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into her hand like someone learning what safety feels like from the inside. When he opened them again, he looked steadier than any crowned ruler in the room. Outside the hall, bells began to ring, not alarm bells, but the older ones, the ones used for public announcements. Word was already moving through the castle. The vampire king had chosen restraint. The human mother had chosen her guardian. The council had been exposed in the one place they couldn't lie without consequences. Marius stood rigid, cornered by law and witness and a hall that had remembered its purpose. Isolde's gaze darted, searching for allies, but found too many eyes that no longer flinched. Seraphine stepped forward, voice clear. By the mother's sanctuary clause, the Crimson Decree cannot override her choice, she said. Any attempt to seize the mother or child now is oath-breaking. The houses will decide what that costs. The threat wasn't violent. It was worse for people like Marius. It was accountability. In the days that followed, there was no spectacle of revenge. Marius and Isolde were stripped of their authority by the same houses that had once bowed to them. They were sent away from court, not harmed, but made small, made ordinary, because the kingdom had finally learned that consequences do not have to be cruel to be real. A regency formed, and Seraphine took the lead in drafting the Dawn Accord, a set of laws that protected humans who lived near vampire lands and demanded restraint from vampire houses that wanted legitimacy. Mara's warded sanctuary became something new, not a trap, but a refuge overseen by both worlds. And Lucien moved into the East Wing, not as a ruler hiding his scandal, but as a guardian keeping a promise. He wore no crown. He carried no banner. Some nights he still walked the halls like a storm, learning how to be gentle, but now there was always a light in one window and a voice inside it that said his name like it belonged to a man worth saving. Months later, when the first cry finally filled Castle Noctavir, small, furious, alive, the entire fortress seemed to pause as if even the stone had been waiting. Lucien stood beside Elara, hands shaking with a fear he did not try to hide, and when the child was placed against her chest, he heard it clearly. One heartbeat became two in the room again. Elara looked up at him, exhausted and glowing with stubborn life. Do you hear it? She whispered. Lucien nodded, tears he never expected slipping down his face without shame. Yes, he said, and I will spend forever being worthy of it. In the doorway, Seraphine watched them with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had gambled everything on a man's capacity to change. Mara set fresh lavender by the window, and the scent drifted into the corridor, soft, human, and stubbornly warm. Outside, dawn touched the snow, and for once the night did not feel like a prison. It felt like a home that had finally learned how to keep its promises.